Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who joins us from around the world. We're so glad you're here. This is Andrew and Renee. Welcome to the Stack series.
Today, we are exploring the future of autoimmune therapy, from microbiomes to cellular reprogramming.
And honestly, looking at the massive stack of research we've pulled together for this session, it really feels like we're standing on the edge of a cliff,
Yeah.
just looking down at this medical landscape that is completely shifting beneath our feet right now.
It really is. I mean, we're talking about a massive fundamental shift occurring right around now in 2026 in how we approach and treat diseases where the human body basically, where it turns on itself.
Exactly.
We're talking about conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis. These are heavy hitters. These are diseases that completely alter the trajectory of a person's life. They're significant burdens. And not just on the healthcare system as a whole, but on the daily lived experiences of millions of people. And you're right to highlight the timing, because it is a profoundly significant moment in medicine.
Right.
Because for a really long time, the entire landscape of immunology was, well, relatively static. If you look back at the historical context...
Which we have to do to understand how crazy this new stuff is.
Right, exactly. If you look at, say, the last 50 years or so of treatment, the primary strategy was what we call suppression.
Which, to put it bluntly, is basically just shutting the whole immune system down. Just telling the body, stop it, behave, go to sleep.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
That was the philosophy. The goal was to dampen the entire immune response, to stop the self-attack. It was a very blunt instrument approach.
Yeah.
You stop the disease, sure, the joint pain goes down, the nerves damage slows down, but you also stop the body's ability to defend itself against literally everything else.
It's like trying to stop a single burglar who got inside your house by just boarding up every single window and door with solid steel so no one can ever enter or leave again.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And that brings us to this new paradigm that's popping up all over the medical literature we're looking at today, this concept of the immune reset.
I love this concept so much. It sounds like something out of a tech manual.
It really does. Because the idea isn't just to quiet the immune system down anymore. It's to actually reboot it entirely.
Like literally turning the human immune system off and on again to see if it clears the software glitch.
That is essentially the biological premise, yes. Potentially offering a true cure rather than just decades of symptom management.
But before we get to the really sci-fi stuff, the cellular engineering and all that, we need to understand the ground we're currently standing on. Our mission today is to unpack how scientists are moving away from this old idea of carpet bombing the immune system and moving toward using smart weapons.
Right. Things like CAR cells, CRISPR gene editing, and even manipulating the bacteria in our gut.
So let's get right into it. Let's start with part one, the foundations. What do we actually think we know right now? You mentioned the old guard of suppression.
Yes.
We have this really fascinating paper from the Annals of the Rheumatic Diseases, and it's titled Smart Battles: Immunosuppression versus Immunomodulation. I think this is a fantastic place to start because the authors use this incredibly detailed analogy of an army. And, I know we use war metaphors all the time in medicine, but here it really truly fits the biology.
It's a very helpful framework for conceptualizing the sheer complexity of what's happening inside you. Because if you imagine your immune system as a literal army, you have to realize it's not just a chaotic mob of soldiers running around blindly.
Right, it's highly structured.
Incredibly structured. You have different regiments, and they all have very specific jobs. For instance, you have the B cells.
Okay, B cells.
Think of the B cells as your artillery units. They don't typically engage in hand-to-hand combat. They stay back and they launch missiles, which, in biological terms, are your antibodies. They fire these guided missiles at specific targets from a distance.
Okay, so B cells are the artillery-firing antibody missiles, and then you have the T cells.
Yes. The T cells are more like your special forces or your frontline infantry. And even within that regiment, you have specialties. You have killer T cells that go right up to an infected cell and engage in literal hand-to-hand combat to destroy it.
Wow.
And you have helper T cells that act more like field commanders, coordinating the attack on the ground. And above all of them, you have the generals, the dendritic cells.
Dendritic cells, okay.
These are the intelligence officers. They patrol the body, gather intelligence on foreign invaders, and then they physically present that intelligence to the T cells and B cells, essentially giving the army its marching orders.
And so, in the case of an autoimmune disease, whether it's lupus attacking the kidneys or RA attacking the joints, that army has basically gone rogue. It's essentially a massive civil war inside the patient's body.
It is a civil war, but it's crucial to understand that it's usually a tragic case of mistaken identity. The army isn't evil. It genuinely thinks the citizens of your body, your joint tissue, your skin cells, the myelin sheath around your nerves, it thinks those are dangerous invaders.
So it's a massive failure of the intelligence officers.
Exactly. It's a breakdown in communication and tolerance. Now, going back to traditional immunosuppression, the drugs we've used for decades, things like cyclophosphamide or very high-dose corticosteroids.
Right, the heavy artillery drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Using those is like declaring widespread indiscriminate warfare on your own military base just because some of the soldiers are misbehaving. You are disabling multiple complex mechanisms all at the exact same time.
You're carpet bombing the entire base.
Basically, yes. You absolutely take out the rogue soldiers who are attacking your joints, which provides relief to the patient. But you are simultaneously taking out the soldiers that are supposed to be standing guard at the gate against the seasonal flu or pneumonia or even rogue cancer cells that pop up naturally.
Right. That's the collateral damage. You stop the self-attack, which is great, but you leave the body's doors wide open. I remember reading through patient forums while prepping for this and reading about folks on these high-dose steroids. They can't go to crowded indoor places. They have to be absolutely terrified of a common cold spreading through their house. It's a really heavy price to pay for joint relief.
It's immense psychological and physical burden. And that reality is exactly why the monumental shift described in the recent research is moving towards targeted immunomodulation. Think of this as modern, smart warfare. We aren't carpet bombing the base anymore.
So instead of dropping a nuke on the whole immune system, we're using, what, sniper drones?
In a manner of speaking, yes. We are targeting very specific communication networks within that army. For example, we now have drugs like TNF inhibitors or IL-17 blockers.
Okay, break those down for us. What are TNF and IL-17?
They are cytokines. Cytokines are basically chemical messengers. Going back to our analogy, they are the literal verbal orders being shouted by the generals on the battlefield.
Got it.
So these modern drugs, these blockers, they don't kill the soldiers. They just intercept and block those specific orders from being heard.
So it's literally like jamming the radio frequency of the enemy. The general is screaming, "Attack the me cartilage," into the radio, but the T cells on the ground just hear static. They never get the order.
That's a great way to put it. And the beauty of this targeted approach is that because you are only blocking that one specific radio frequency, the rest of the army can still function. They can still hear other orders on different channels, like attack that flu virus. So you restore homeostasis, you bring back the balance without wiping out the entire defensive force.
But as I was reading the EGLR COVID-19 task force notes, I noticed there is a pretty intense debate among doctors about the terminology here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Words matter immensely in medicine, both legally and psychologically. The research highlights this ongoing confusion and debate. Should we call these new drugs immunosuppressants, or should we call them immunomodulators?
Right, because the term immunomodulatory sounds so much safer to a patient sitting in a clinic. It sounds like you're just, tweaking the dials, like adjusting the treble and bass on a stereo.
Precisely. It sounds gentle,
Yeah.
and that term is very popular for that reason. But the scientific debate is that immunosuppressive is actually often more accurate when you look at the hard data regarding infection risks.
Because even a sniper drone is taking out a piece of your defense.
Exactly. Even targeted therapies lower your overall defenses. If you block the specific signal that tells the army to attack the knee, you might inadvertently be blocking a very similar signal that tells the army to attack a fungal infection in the lungs. So while doctors and pharmaceutical companies want to use the friendly term modulation, the task force argues we have to be completely honest about the biological reality. You are still turning down a critical part of the patient's defense system.
Which brings us perfectly to this massive new concept that seems to move entirely beyond both suppression and modulation. And this is the concept of the immune reset.
Yeah.
We have this paper from Frontiers in Immunology, published recently, titled Immune Reset Plus. And honestly, reading this felt like reading about the holy grail of rheumatology.
It is a radical departure from everything we've done before.
Right, so lay it out for us. What exactly is an immune reset in the context of these diseases?
The definition here is critical because we are moving away from the idea of lifelong maintenance therapy. An immune reset is the deliberate process of completely depleting the corrupted immune components.
So killing them off.
Yes, specifically destroying those autoreactive B cells or T cells that are actively causing the tissue damage. And you deplete them so thoroughly, so completely, that the patient's immune system is forced to regenerate itself from scratch. starting from the stem cells in the bone marrow.
So you really do just wipe the slate completely clean. You delete the entire corrupted army, and you let the military academy, the bone marrow, train a brand new batch of naive recruits.
That is the exact theory. It's a factory reboot of the human body. The fundamental idea is that the stem cells sitting deep inside your bone marrow, the parent cells that give birth to your immune cells, they aren't necessarily inherently corrupt. They still retain the biological potential to create healthy, tolerant, non-attacking immune cells.
Okay, so the factory isn't broken.
Exactly. It's the mature cells currently circulating in your bloodstream that have learned bad habits over time due to some environmental trigger. So the logic is, kill the bad habits by comprehensively killing the mature cells that hold those habits.
That is incredible. But the paper we're looking at specifically argues that a simple reset might actually not be enough. The authors talk about immune reset plus. What is the plus?
Well, think about how you handle a computer virus. If you just reboot a computer that has a deeply embedded virus on the hard drive, it doesn't fix the problem. Even if you completely reinstall the operating system, if you immediately go back and keep opening the exact same infected email attachments that caused the problem in the first place, the virus is just going to come right back.
Right. If the physical environment that caused the immune system to glitch out in the first place is still present in the body, those brand new recruits from the bone marrow are just going to get corrupted all over again.
Precisely. The plus factor involves utilizing secondary therapies that actively maintain immune tolerance after the reboot is complete. You don't just reset the system and walk away. You have to actively teach the new regenerating immune system not to make the exact same mistakes the old one did.
So it's about managing the biological environment that these new cells are being born into.
Yes, it's about maintaining a peaceful environment so the new cells don't get agitated.
And part of managing that cellular environment, which I found absolutely fascinating, and honestly, it kind of blew my mind a little bit, involves metabolism.
Ah, yes. Immunometabolism.
Right, because typically when you and I hear the word metabolism, we think about, burning off the calories from a donut we ate or trying to lose weight for summer. But we have all these sources here discussing metabolism at the cellular level.
It is a rapidly exploding field of study, and it completely changes how we view cellular behavior. The paper we reviewed on immunocyte lipid metabolic reprogramming really highlights this paradigm shift. It turns out immune cells, like those frontline T cells or the dendritic general cells, they actually behave completely differently based on what type of fuel they eat.
Wait, back up just a second. Cells eat? I mean, I know logically they consume energy to survive, but does the specific type of fuel actually change the cell's personality?
It genuinely does. Think of a T cell like a highly advanced hybrid car engine. It can run on traditional gas or it can run on electricity. Biologically, T cells can run on glucose, which is basic sugar, or they can run on lipids, which are fats. And the cell's choice of fuel fundamentally dictates its aggressive behavior.
So a T cell running on a sugar high acts differently than a T cell running on, like, a strict keto diet.
In a cellular sense, surprisingly, yes. When a T cell is in full attack mode, when it detects a virus and needs to multiply rapidly and fight aggressively, it purposefully switches its internal engine to a process called glycolysis. It rapidly burns sugar.
Okay.
The glycolysis provides dirty, fast energy, and burning that fast energy physically promotes inflammatory pathways inside the cell.
Okay, so in the immune system, sugar basically equals war.
Roughly speaking, yes. Fast energy for fast attacks. But when a T cell needs to act as a peacekeeper, what we call a regulatory T cell that calms the immune system down after an infection is cleared, it typically switches its engine to fatty acid oxidation. It burns lipids, fats.
And that's different how?
It's a much slower, far more stable, long-term energy source.
Mm.
And utilizing that specific metabolic pathway promotes tolerance and anti-inflammatory behavior.
So fat equals peace.
Generally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here is the massive problem we see in autoimmune diseases.
Mm-hmm.
The research suggests that in diseases like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, the immune cells are metabolically stuck. Their internal engines are broken.
Oh, wow.
They're metabolically hardwired to be inflammatory all the time. They're stuck constantly burning sugar, or they are processing those lipids in a defective way that creates toxic cellular byproducts, which in turn drives chronic inflammation.
So they're basically hangry. They're stuck on this permanent agitated sugar crash, and they're just lashing out at the body's tissues.
That's a very colorful way to put it, but mechanically, it's not inaccurate. So the lipid reprogramming, mentioned in the title of that paper, that is about pharmacologically intervening in that cellular engine. The theory is, If we can develop drugs that physically force the cells to switch their fuel source, if we can block their ability to burn sugar and force them to burn fats instead, we might actually be able to transform them from aggressive soldiers back into calm peacekeepers.
That is just wild to me because it means it's not just about blocking a radioreceptor on the outside of the cell like we talked about earlier. It's literally about opening the hood of the cell and rebuilding the engine from the inside out. It's treating the entire immune system by dictating its molecular fuel supply.
It is.
Yeah.
And it opens up an entirely new, massive avenue of therapy that has absolutely nothing to do with killing or suppressing the immune system, but rather feeding it correctly at a microscopic level to change its behavior.
Man, that is fascinating. Now, speaking of fuel and what we eat and digest, we have to pivot our discussion. We can't talk about fueling the human body without talking about the literal place where fuel is processed. And this leads us perfectly into part 2 of our discussion today, the active debate. Because it seems like every single time we talk about any aspect of human health these days, the microbiome shows up.
It absolutely does, and for very good reason. We have several robust sources here from clinical and experimental immunology discussing the gut microbiome as the human body's forgotten organ. For a very long time in medicine, we truly thought the gut was just a passive, muscular tube for digestion and absorption, but now we know it's actually an incredibly complex immunological command center.
But the big glaring question in all these papers we read seems to be this. Is the gut microbiome the actual criminal causing the disease, or is it just an innocent bystander that gets damaged? Like, is a bad microbiome the root cause of autoimmunity, or is a messed up gut just a consequence of already being chronically sick?
That right there is the absolute core of the scientific debate today. It's the classic chicken and egg problem in rheumatology. We do know, definitively, that in individuals who already have a genetic predisposition to these diseases, the gut microbiome can act as the environmental trigger that pulls the gun's trigger. We talk constantly about dysbiosis.
Right, which is just a fancy term for a bacterial imbalance.
Exactly. An imbalance in the massive bacterial populations in your intestines.
So you have way too many bad guys and just not nearly enough good guys keeping them in check.
That's the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this severe imbalance constantly drives pro-inflammatory signals throughout the whole body. But what's truly terrifying is that the evidence is getting incredibly, surprisingly specific. It's no longer just vague talk about bad bacteria in general. Scientists have literally identified specific individual bacterial culprits.
Yes. And one of them, which I read about in the prep materials, is Enterococcus gallinarum. And reading about this specific bacteria felt like reading a biological detective thriller.
It truly does.
Walk us through this one, because this is a bacteria that naturally lives in the gut, right? It's supposed to be locked up in the digestive jail.
It is what we call a commensal bacteria. It naturally lives in the gut of mice, and it lives in the gut of humans. Under normal, healthy conditions, it stays right there in the intestinal tract, helping with basic functions. But in these very specific studies proven in mouse models, researchers found something incredibly disturbing. In mice that were genetically prone to developing autoimmunity, this specific bacteria was found actively living inside the liver and other sterile tissues.
It literally escaped the containment facility.
It did. The clinical term is that it translocated. It physically crossed the protective mucosal barrier of the gut, entered the host's bloodstream, traveled through the body, and set up a hiding spot inside the liver.
That's insidious.
And once it is sitting inside the liver, the host's immune system absolutely freaks out. The dendritic cells detect a foreign bacterial invader sitting in a highly secure, sterile zone. So naturally, the immune system launches a massive attack.
Because that's its job.
Exactly. But here's the tragedy. The specific antibodies the immune system creates to fight this escaped bacteria end up cross-reacting and aggressively attacking the body's own healthy tissues.
So the immune system isn't actually crazy or glitching out in this scenario. It's actually just doing its job trying to fight a literal invader. But the invader is hiding behind the body's own expensive furniture, so the furniture just gets completely smashed to pieces in the crossfire.
That is an exceptionally good analogy. The collateral damage is the autoimmune disease. And then there's another specific culprit identified in the literature, segmented filamentous bacteria, or SFB.
And what does this one do?
Well, this one doesn't even have to escape the gut to cause a war. Just by being physically present in high numbers along the intestinal lining, it actively promotes the systemic production of Th17 cells.
And from our foundation section, Th17 cells are those heavy infantry, high inflammation soldiers, right?
Yes, they are highly inflammatory. SFB essentially acts like a rogue drill sergeant, constantly training the immune army to be hyper-aggressive. So simply having an overabundance of this one specific bacteria present in your gut can actively push your entire immune system toward a severe arthritis-like state.
Wow. And then on the flip side of that, there's Lactobacillus reuteri. Now, I feel like I see lactobacillus plastered all over yogurt commercials and probiotic pill bottles all the time. It's marketed as the ultimate good guy bacteria, but the research we looked at says it's actually incredibly complicated.
It is a remarkably tricky character in the microbiome story. The deep research shows that this specific strain can actually aggressively exaggerate lupus symptoms in certain mouse models, making them much sicker. But in completely different models of disease, it can be highly beneficial and soothing.
Okay, that is wild.
It highlights a massive, dangerous misconception that the general public has right now. This idea that probiotics are inherently always good for you. No, biology is entirely context-dependent. What acts as a helpful good guy bacteria for a perfectly healthy person might actually act as a severe inflammatory trigger for someone sitting there with a specific autoimmune genetic makeup.
That is genuinely terrifying for anyone out there trying to self-medicate their joint pain with random over-the-counter supplements from the grocery store. You could literally be throwing gasoline on your own fire.
You absolutely could be.
And that immense complexity leads us directly to what I really want to call the antibiotic paradox in the research. I was reading through the source material on this, specifically the Shaheen paper, and honestly, Renee, I got so confused at first. We have one study where giving antibiotics caused massive inflammation, and then another study right next to it where giving antibiotics basically cured the autoimmune disease. How do we scientifically square that circle?
This is exactly why we have to be incredibly careful with how we interpret and report medical data, and why flashy news headlines can be so dangerous and misleading for patients. Let's look at the specific mechanisms in the Shaheen paper to understand the paradox.
Okay, let's break it down slowly. Let's look at Study A.
In Study A, researchers were using animal models of severe arthritis. They administered broad-spectrum antibiotics to the subjects. The shocking result was that the arthritis actually got significantly worse.
But why? If bacteria cause inflammation, shouldn't killing them help?
Because the antibiotics were broad-spectrum. They indiscriminately killed everything. In doing so, they completely depleted the specific populations of bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. And those specific fatty acids are the exact peacekeeper fuel sources we talked about earlier that calm the immune system down.
Oh, so by taking the antibiotic, you accidentally wiped out the UN peacekeepers in the gut, and so the Civil War just escalated completely out of control.
Correct. Without those regulatory calming bacteria producing those specific fatty acids, the inflammatory immune cells just ran wild. But then you have to look at Study B, which involved models of severe lupus nephritis kidney inflammation. In that specific case, administering antibiotics essentially cured the disease, or at least significantly delayed its onset and severity.
Okay, so why the massive difference in outcome?
Because in that specific lupus model, the entire disease process was being primarily driven by a very specific bad actor, a particular strain of bacteria from the Lactobacillus family. The antibiotic in that scenario successfully hunted down and killed that specific driver of the disease.
So in one case, the drug accidentally killed the police force. In the other case, the drug successfully killed the criminal mastermind.
Exactly. It's a blunt tool. But here is the real kicker from the paper that we absolutely have to highlight. Timing. The research emphasizes that antibiotics given before the physical onset of the disease had a completely radically different effect on the immune system than antibiotics given after the disease was already established.
That actually makes perfect logical sense. If you kill the criminal mastermind before he even starts the riot, you successfully prevent the riot from ever happening. But if you just blindly bomb the entire city after the riot has already been raging for a month,
you might just add to the chaos and destroy the infrastructure trying to rebuild. This nuance is exactly why doctors cannot simply tell autoimmune patients, take antibiotics to fix your gut, or never take antibiotics because it ruins your gut. It entirely depends on exactly what specific bacteria are currently driving your specific disease phenotype and exactly when in the disease timeline we intervene.
That is such a critical takeaway for anyone listening. It's not a simple binary switch. It's an entire thriving ecosystem. And speaking of entire ecosystems, we have to talk about FMT, fecal microbiota transplants.
Yes.
This is the somewhat gross but fascinating idea of taking the literal gut microbiome from a totally healthy person and physically transplanting it into a sick person's gut to reset the ecosystem.
It sounds extreme, But we've actually seen this exact procedure work absolute miracles in treating severe, life-threatening C. diff infections in hospitals. It saves lives. But when we apply FMT to complex autoimmunity, the data shows it is incredibly risky.
Right, because I saw a study mentioned in our stack where they actually transplanted the microbiota from a sick human twin, a twin who had multiple sclerosis, into a completely healthy, germ-free mouse.
Yes, the MS Quinn study.
And the mouse actually got MS.
That rapidly developed an MS-like illness, yes. That specific study is profound because it heavily suggests that the actual information of the autoimmune disease, the instruction manual for the immune system to attack the nervous system, is at least partly encoded directly inside the gut microbiome itself.
That is both terrifying and utterly amazing. It's literally like a biological software transfer. You're downloading a corrupted operating system, literally and metaphorically, into a brand new host, and the host crashes.
It is exactly like that. And this is why the clinical trials in humans are so mixed right now. While we've seen some real success like specific probiotic cocktails helping induce remission in patients with ulcerative colitis, we've also seen highly publicized failures. For example, similar probiotic interventions largely fail to maintain remission in Crohn's disease trials.
So it's not a silver bullet yet.
Far from it. It shows us unequivocally that the gut microbiome is a massive central piece of the autoimmune puzzle, but we frankly haven't quite figured out exactly how to fit that piece into the larger picture perfectly safely yet.
So if the gut is this insanely complex, constantly shifting landscape, and the immune army is this massive, complicated machine, how do doctors even know what's actually going on inside a patient's body at any given moment? This brings us to a huge problem highlighted in the research, the problem of biomarkers.
This is arguably one of the major clinical challenges we face daily. Currently, if you walk into a standard rheumatologist's office today complaining of joint pain or fatigue, we primarily rely on standard blood tests, like the ANA, the anti-nuclear antibodies test. It's
Right, the standard ANA test that everyone gets. You either pop positive or negative.
exactly, it's very binary.
Yeah.
But the source material we are discussing today, specifically the fascinating paper on multi-omics-driven biomarker discovery, goes out of its way to point out the severe, almost crippling limitations of these legacy tests. These traditional tests severely lack both sensitivity and specificity. They essentially only tell you that you are, in fact, sick.
Right.
They confirm that systemic inflammation currently exists in your body. But they absolutely do not tell you exactly how the disease will physically progress next month, or which specific cellular pathway is actively driving the inflammation today versus which one was driving it yesterday.
So it's basically exactly like the check engine light on my car dashboard. It just glows red and tells me, hey, something is wrong in here. But it could just be a slightly loose gas cap, or my entire transmission could be actively melting into slag. The little red light looks exactly the same either way.
That is a perfect analogy. And just like with your car, you absolutely wouldn't want your mechanic to just randomly start ripping out and replacing incredibly expensive engine parts solely based on that one idiot light. You want them to plug in the computer and run deep, specific diagnostics.
Right.
And that deep diagnostic capability is exactly where the new concept of panomics or multiomics comes into the clinical picture.
Okay, panomics. Explain this entire concept to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Because we have all these terms in the paper: genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics. Why in the world do doctors need all of them at the exact same time?
Let's use the analogy of building a complex house. Genomics, which is looking at your static DNA. That is the architectural blueprint. It tells you exactly what could theoretically be built on this plot of land. It outlines your baseline genetic potential and your inherited risk for certain diseases.
Okay, so DNA is the static paper blueprint sitting on the table.
Yes. Next, you have transcriptomics, which is looking at your RNA. Think of RNA as the loud construction foreman on the site shouting orders through a megaphone. Transcriptomics tells you exactly what is actually being built right now in real time. It's the foreman yelling, "Build a wall here, pour the concrete now."
Got it. So DNA is the silent plan, RNA is the active shouting of orders.
Exactly. Then you move to proteomics. This is the study of the actual proteins. These are the physical bricks, the mortar, the wooden beams. The proteins are the tangible physical structures and the tiny molecular machines inside the cell that are actually doing the heavy lifting and causing the physical tissue damage in a disease.
Okay, blueprint, foreman, bricks.
And finally, metabolomics, which we touched on earlier when talking about cellular fuel. That represents the massive diesel fuel delivery trucks actively driving up to the construction site to power the cranes and bulldozers.
So multiomics, or panomics, is the ability to stand back and simultaneously look at the paper blueprint while listening to the foreman scream, while inspecting the quality of the bricks, and while watching the fuel trucks arrive, all at the exact same time.
Yes, it is a holistic, real-time view of human biology. Currently, standard medicine mostly just looks at the bricks, the proteins in the blood. But the ultimate goal described in this paper is to build what they call a closed-loop model of medical care. Imagine a healthcare system where an individual patient's data, pulled from all of these diverse omics levels, is continuously, seamlessly fed into advanced machine learning models.
So you're saying it wouldn't just be getting a snapshot blood test once a year at your annual physical. It would be like watching a continuous high-definition movie of your own immune system.
Ideally, yes. Imagine wearing a non-invasive device or utilizing a very frequent rapid at-home test that constantly monitors your transcriptomics, your RNA orders. The machine learning algorithm could theoretically hear the cellular foreman shouting, "Start a massive inflammatory attack," 3 full days before you ever actually feel the first twinge of pain in your joints.
That is incredible. And the closed loop part of the phrase means the system would then automatically adjust your daily medication to intercept the attack.
That is the ultimate dream of predictive personalized medicine. The algorithm would say, your inflammatory RNA transcripts are rapidly rising. Take this specific microdose of this specific inhibitor today, thereby completely preventing the flare-up before the clinical symptoms even begin to manifest.
Man, that sounds completely like science fiction. But the papers we are reading literally say we are heading there right now. And speaking of science fiction rapidly becoming reality, let's go ahead and move into part 3, the frontiers section. Because this is the stuff that might literally change everything about how we view human disease. And we absolutely have to start with the big one. The one that's actively making frontline news headlines all over the world right now, CAR-T cell therapy.
This is truly a new dawn. As one of the researchers in our sources emphatically describes it, it represents a fundamental, ground-up shift in how we approach the treatment of severe autoimmune conditions.
Okay, for anyone listening who maybe haven't seen the news or heard of CAR-T before, let's break the acronym down. Because this was originally developed entirely for cancer treatment, right?
Yes, specifically it was developed for aggressive blood cancers, like severe leukemia and lymphoma. CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor.
Whenever I hear that, I always think of the chimera from ancient Greek mythology. You know, the monster with the lion's body and the goat's head. It's a literal mashup of different creatures.
That is actually a highly apt comparison, because biologically, these engineered cells are literal hybrids. The process is intense. In a highly specialized clean room lab, we physically extract a patient's own T cells, their frontline immune soldiers, straight out of their bloodstream. We harvest millions of them. Then, using viral vectors, we genetically engineer those cells. We physically insert new DNA into them to give them a brand new, highly specific targeting and guidance system.
Okay.
We basically take a blind soldier and teach them to flawlessly hunt down one single specific target.
So we take the patient's own soldiers out of their body, we bolt on special high-tech night vision goggles that only let them see the specific enemy, and then we inject them back into the patient.
That is exactly what happens. Now, in the context of treating autoimmunity instead of cancer, the defined enemy is the B cell. Specifically, we program these new receptors to target specific protein markers, usually a marker called CD19 or BCMA, that are found exclusively on the outer surface of all B cells. We are literally programming the T cells to aggressively hunt down and completely destroy the B cell population.
But wait, why go after the B cells? I thought they were just the artillery.
Because in severe diseases like lupus, the B cells are the actual rogue factories continuously producing the deadly autoantibodies. They're the ones endlessly launching the missiles directly at your own DNA and your kidneys. If you destroy the factories, you stop the missile barrage.
So the engineered CAR-T cells go back into the bloodstream and they just massacre the B cells.
They do. They're incredibly, terrifyingly efficient serial killers at the cellular level. A single CAR T cell can kill thousands of B cells. They rapidly multiply inside the patient and wipe out the entire corrupted B cell population in a matter of days.
And the clinical results we're seeing, the PBS News report we reviewed actually uses the phrase lupus cures, and they use the word cure, which is a word that cautious research scientists almost never ever use. We usually always say long-term remission.
The clinical data is truly remarkable. We're talking about highly refractory patients, meaning these are people who absolutely did not respond to anything else in modern medicine. Heavy steroids, toxic chemo, advanced biologics, Nothing worked. Their organs were failing, they were dying, and after a single infusion of CAR T therapy, they entered completely drug-free remission.
Drug-free. That is the insane part. And the coolest underlying mechanism here goes right back to the immune reset concept we discussed in part 1, because the CAR T cells violently wipe out the existing B cells, but eventually those engineered CAR T cells die off, and the patient's B cells naturally grow back from the bone marrow stem cells, right?
They do grow back, yes. And here is the fascinating, almost magical biological part of this therapy. When those new B cells return to the bloodstream months later, they are naive. They are completely healthy. They absolutely do not produce the deadly autoantibodies that the old ones did.
That is the ultimate hard reboot. You completely wiped the corrupted hard drive, and when the body naturally reinstalled the operating system from the bio backup, the virus was completely gone. The actual immunological memory of the lupus was permanently erased.
That strongly appears to be exactly what is happening at a molecular level. The deeply ingrained immune memory of the disease has been successfully deleted.
But and we have to be brutally honest and real with our listeners here. This isn't just like popping a new fancy pill with your breakfast. The actual physical process of getting this therapy is grueling, right?
It is an incredibly intense, physically demanding medical procedure. Before the doctor can even put those engineered CAR T cells back into your body, you have to undergo a process called lymphodepletion.
Lymphodepletion.
Yes. You essentially have to give the patient a short, aggressive round of toxic chemotherapy to kill off a large portion of their existing natural immune cells just to physically make room and create a welcoming chemical environment for the new engineered cells to expand.
Wow. So you literally have to go through chemotherapy with all its side effects just to prepare your body to receive the actual treatment.
Yes. And then there is the massive logistical hurdle of the manufacturing time. Currently, you have to hook the patient up to a machine to filter their blood, take the raw cells out, pack them on dry ice, ship them across the country to a highly specialized multi-million-dollar lab, genetically engineer them, and then carefully grow them in a bioreactor for weeks before shipping them back. It takes immense time, and critically ill patients often do not have weeks to wait.
Which perfectly leads us to the new cutting-edge innovation highlighted in our stack of sources today, the development of ultra-fast CAR T. There's an active clinical trial right now, NCT 07331467, that is actively exploring a revolutionary method to drastically reduce this bottleneck.
Yes. The primary goal of that trial is to compress the entire complex manufacturing time from several weeks down to just a couple of days.
That's a massive leap.
It is. Because if we can manufacture and return the engineered cells significantly faster, the cells themselves are actually younger, more robust, and potentially far more lethal to the target. Plus, standardizing a 2-day process makes the entire treatment exponentially cheaper and more accessible to the average hospital.
And researchers are also working on something called dual targeting, right? Because as we know, Mother Nature is incredibly tricky.
Nature, especially a disease process under pressure, always finds a way to adapt and survive. Sometimes, if you engineer a CAR T cell to only target one single marker, say only the CD19 protein, the disease can actually learn to hide.
Yeah.
The cancerous or autoimmune B cells might undergo a tiny genetic mutation and simply stop displaying the CD19 protein on their surface.
Oh, wow. So they just take off the uniform.
Exactly. They take off the uniform, and suddenly they become completely invisible to the roaming CRT cells. The killer cells float right past them. In oncology, this dangerous phenomenon is known as antigen escape.
That is so incredibly sneaky.
It's evolutionary biology in action. So the concept of dual targeting involves complex engineering, where you program the T cells to aggressively look for two completely different markers, simultaneously say CD19 and BCMA. It dramatically reduces the statistical probability of the disease mutating enough to hide.
It's literally like looking for a wanted criminal by checking for both their facial recognition and their specific fingerprints at the exact same time. If they put on a mask to hide their face, you still instantly catch them by scanning their prints.
Precisely. It systematically closes off the biological escape routes.
Okay, so CAR T is all about physically extracting cells, heavily editing them outside the body in a lab, and putting them back. But what about editing the patient's cells directly while they are still inside the body? That brings us to the next massive frontier, CRISPR.
CRISPR-Cas9. True gene editing. This is the ultimate microscopic precision engineering. The fascinating source from the Global Autoimmune Institute discusses the theoretical future of using CRISPR technology to permanently edit the fundamental genetic code of a patient's immune cells directly.
And there was this specific wild study we read about a hidden switch. When I was reading this, it honestly sounded like something pulled straight out of a James Bond spy movie.
It really does sound like science fiction. Recent, highly advanced genomic studies have discovered very specific genetic regions, areas of what we used to dismiss as junk or non-coding DNA, that actually act as master physical switches for the cell's inflammatory receptors. The revolutionary idea is that instead of constantly forcing a patient to take expensive daily drugs to chemically block a receptor, we could theoretically just use a CRISPR infusion to go in and permanently flip the genetic switch at the foundational DNA level.
Right.
We could simply edit out the specific molecular instruction that tells the cell to be inflammatory in the first place.
So you're not just desperately trying to fight the raging fire in the kitchen. You're literally walking outside and permanently disconnecting the main gas line to the house.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. But as with all powerful tools, this carries absolutely massive, unprecedented biological risk.
The ultimate oops factor.
We call them off-target effects. Standard CRISPR technology operates exactly like a pair of microscopic molecular scissors. You program it to cut a specific sequence. But sometimes it makes a mistake, and it cuts a very similar-looking piece of DNA located somewhere else, entirely on the genome.
Which is bad.
Very bad. If the scissors accidentally cut and destroy a vital tumor suppressor gene, you could inadvertently cause aggressive cancer in a patient you were trying to cure of arthritis. And here's the terrifying part.
Yeah.
Unlike a pill that you can just stop taking if you feel sick, you cannot simply flush CRISPR out of your system. The genetic edit is absolute and permanent. It is physically passed down to every single daughter cell that cell ever makes for the rest of the patient's life.
That is utterly terrifying to think about, just sitting there thinking, oops, we accidentally permanently deleted your biological ability to fight off leukemia while we were trying to fix your swollen knee.
Exactly. The stakes are unimaginably high. And that inherent danger is exactly why there's currently so much intense scientific interest and funding pouring into a newer variation called base editing, which is heavily mentioned in the recent research.
Okay, how is that different from the scissors?
Standard CRISPR finally breaks the double strand of the DNA helix. It literally snaps the rungs of the ladder completely in half to insert a change. Base editing is infinitely more gentle and precise. It utilizes a highly engineered enzyme to chemically change just one single letter of the genetic code, say, cleanly converting an A to a G without ever actually cutting the structural DNA strands at all.
Okay, so if standard CRISPR is using a pair of scissors to physically cut a whole paragraph out of a book, base editing is like using a tiny pencil eraser to carefully rub out one single typo and rewrite one letter.
Yes, it is much, much less likely to accidentally shred the entire book. It represents a significantly safer, much more viable path forward for human trials.
All right, we have one more frontier to cover before we move on. Induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs. Now, this feels entirely different to me because almost everything we've talked about for the last hour is focused on stopping the immune attack. iPSCs seem to be entirely about fixing the massive mess that the immune system left behind after the war.
That is a highly accurate assessment. The other therapies we've discussed are strictly about putting out the raging fire. iPSCs are the construction crew coming in to rebuild the burned-down house.
So actual tissue regeneration?
Yes, true regeneration. For example, in a patient with severe rheumatoid arthritis, the physical cartilage inside their joints is permanently destroyed by the inflammation. In a patient with type 1 diabetes, the vital insulin-producing islet cells inside their pancreas are completely wiped out. The human body generally cannot grow these back, but iPSCs theoretically allow us to take a simple, healthy skin cell from that exact patient's arm, chemically reprogram it backward in time into a blank slate stem cell, and then specifically coax it to grow into brand new healthy cartilage or brand new islet cells to physically replace exactly what the disease destroyed.
And we also have this incredible Stanford medicine research piece in our stack talking about gentle cures using stem cells. This seemed like an absolutely huge deal for the future of accessibility.
It is a fundamentally crucial development for the field. Historically, to do a full bone marrow stem cell transplant to cure a disease, it required incredibly harsh, toxic chemotherapy, toxic conditioning, to completely eradicate the patient's old, diseased bone marrow to make room for the new stem cells.
Right. Similar to the CAR T prep, but way worse.
Much worse. It was so dangerous and incredibly brutal on the body that it kept the vast majority of sick people from ever qualifying for the treatment. The Stanford research we reviewed demonstrates a revolutionary new method for blood stem cell transplants that successfully cures type 1 diabetes in mouse models, absolutely, without using that harsh chemotherapy.
That's amazing. So they use targeted antibodies to selectively clear out the space in the marrow instead of just blindly nuking the whole body with radiation or chemo.
Exactly. It uses smart antibodies. And by doing that, it lowers the medical barrier to entry significantly. If doctors don't have to practically poison the patient to near death in order to cure them, the curative treatment suddenly becomes safely available to small children, to the frail elderly, to people whose organs simply aren't strong enough to survive standard chemo.
Man, this all sounds so incredible. Cures, resets, tissue regeneration. But as always, we have to firmly ground this conversation back in reality. Which brings us to our final section, part 4. The implications. Because whenever humanity starts throwing around words like cures and permanent gene editing, there are massive strings attached, really big, heavy societal strings.
There are always profound, unavoidable implications when medicine leaps forward this fast. And the very first and most glaringly obvious one we have to address is the financial cost.
The actual literal cost of cures. Because we're already seeing this exact crisis playing out right now with the current CAR-T therapies approved for cancer. Those treatments cost, what, something like $500,000 for one single infusion.
Often closer to $1 million once you factor in the massive hospital ICU stays and the specialized care required. The fundamental manufacturing complexity of these living drugs is astronomically high. This is true personalized medicine. You absolutely cannot just mass-produce 1 million standard CAR-T pills in a chemical factory in New Jersey. You are spending weeks highly manufacturing a complex living biological drug for one single specific human being. The source material we read, Personalized Medicine for Autoimmune Diseases, raises a very difficult, uncomfortable ethical question. Is this rapid advancement going to inevitably create a permanent two-tier global health system?
Right, a dystopian system where the incredibly wealthy get a hard reboot and a permanent cure, and literally everyone else is just stuck taking daily generic immunosuppressants for the rest of their lives, slowly accumulating joint damage.
That is the immense fear among ethicists and public health officials right now. Even if the scientific cure exists and works perfectly, if it costs $500,000 per patient, private insurance companies and nationalized health systems simply are going to struggle to ever cover it. The math doesn't work. Who actually pays for 1 million people to get $500,000 therapies? It's a massive economic barrier that brilliant laboratory science alone simply cannot solve.
And then, even if you can afford it, there's the glaring issue of safety. We talked glowingly earlier about the new dawn of these therapies, but we also have serious sources in our stacks specifically warning doctors about the incoming storm. And they literally use the word storm, specifically the cytokine storm.
Yes. Cytokine release syndrome, clinically known as CRS. We need to be exceptionally crystal clear about this risk with our audience. This is not just getting a mild fever after a flu shot. When you infuse those supercharged hyperaggressive B cells en masse, it creates a massive, overwhelming systemic release of inflammatory alarm signals. The body essentially becomes a toxic war zone.
And the patients end up crashing into the ICU.
They frequently do. Their core body temperature can spike to dangerous levels, their blood pressure can completely bottom out, and their major organs, like their lungs and kidneys, can rapidly start to fail from the sheer stress of the immune reaction. It requires highly specialized, round-the-clock intensive care to manage. And alongside CRS, there is also the severe risk of neurotoxicity, which is medically known as ICANS.
And CANSS. This is the terrifying brain swelling complication, right?
Yes. It aggressively affects the central nervous system. Following the cellular infusion, patients can suddenly become profoundly confused. They can completely lose their physical ability to speak or comprehend language, or they can experience severe, life-threatening seizures. Now, it's usually temporary, and we are getting much better at treating it, but watching it happen is absolutely terrifying for the family and the patient.
So here is the brutal ethical dilemma that the papers bring up and that every rheumatologist is going to have to face soon. A disease like lupus is chronic, it's painful, it's a miserable burden, but realistically, it's usually manageable for decades with our current drugs. You can live a long, relatively full life. Is it truly ethically sound to ask a patient to risk a massive, life-threatening cytokine storm, literally risking dying in an ICU bed next week to potentially cure a disease that they probably could have just lived with?
That is the exact agonizing question that patients and their doctors are having to weigh right now in these early clinical trials. For the severely refractory patients we mentioned earlier, the people who truly have zero other medical options left and are already facing imminent organ failure and death from their disease, the extreme risk of CAR-T is very often worth the gamble. But for a younger patient with relatively mild, perfectly controlled disease,
Yeah.
probably not. The risk profile is simply too high right now.
So the rigorous execution mentioned in the Lupus Society guidelines is absolutely key. We can't just blindly start throwing this highly toxic, expensive treatment at everyone who walks into a clinic just because it's the flashy new shiny toy in the medical world.
Exactly. Our scientific enthusiasm must be strictly matched by our clinical safety protocols. The medical community needs to definitively know exactly how to reliably predict and safely manage the cytokine storm before we can ever ethically invite the broader patient population into it.
But for those desperate pioneers who do get it, and for whom it actually works flawlessly, the profound psychological impact is just hard to even fathom. We have this one incredibly moving quote from the PBS News report we watched. The patient said, "I woke up one day and thought, oh my God, I don't feel sick anymore."
That simple sentence represents an absolute world-shattering paradigm shift for that individual. We're talking about moving away from the deeply ingrained identity of a chronic patient, someone whose entire daily existence revolves around carefully managing pain symptoms, constantly scheduling specialist appointments, obsessively pacing their physical energy, to a person who is simply suddenly cured.
It's an identity crisis, but like in the absolute best way possible. You literally have to figure out who you actually are as a human being when you aren't the sick person in your family anymore. The heavy psychological burden of carrying a chronic illness for decades is so immense, you honestly probably don't even realize how much invisible weight you are carrying every day until it's suddenly completely gone.
It is truly a profound psychological rebirth. And honestly, as I look at this massive upward trajectory we've discussed today, from the very dark old days of blunt carpet-bombing immune suppression to the highly targeted precision drone strikes of modern modulation, and now arriving at this astonishing new dawn of complete immune resets, cellular engineering, and tissue regeneration, I truly, deeply believe that the next 10 years of clinical medicine will look absolutely nothing like the last 20. We are actively crossing the threshold into an entirely new era of human healing.
It's just amazing. It's incredibly hopeful. It's definitely a little bit scary with the risks. But the most exciting part is that it's all happening right now in labs all over the world.
It is indeed.
Before we wrap up, thank you to all our partners, sponsors, and scholars who made this podcast and the research possible. We're truly grateful for your support.
And to our listeners, thank you for being part of this journey with us. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe and support us on Patreon. And of course, you can write to us in comments if a specific topic needed to be covered, which help us all to grow.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and let the search for wisdom guide you forward. Have a great day.